Hello, and welcome to today's session, ArcGIS Insights, Analysis and Reporting. My name is Scott Sandusky, Product Manager, and I'm with Chris Wesson and Warren Davidson on the Insights team. Let's get started. So today we're going to talk about what's insights and have a deep dive into analysis, specifically exploratory, spatial, and statistical analysis. We'll also have another deep dive into reporting and collaboration. And then we'll wrap it up with talking about what's coming ahead and some resources. So Insights is all about interactive visual analytics, maps, charts, tables, all working together to do not only dashboarding and reporting, but also analytics. Basically boils down to three things. Connect to your data, both spatial and tabular, in the same spot, and then use it. Visualize it, analyze it, throw it into charts, maps, tables, explore it. And not only just explore it, but ask questions of your data. Run processes, run scripts, and everything that you do within Insights is recorded in a model. And once you're satisfied, added context to your information product or interactive report, share it with others so that it can be used. We've designed Insights so that we can bring spatial analytics to everybody. No longer do you have to be a GIS analyst to do advanced spatial capabilities, but now everybody that's an analyst, data scientist, or even a specialist can use the value of spatial. With Insights, you can connect to flat files, enterprise GIS, whether it's online or enterprise, relational databases, Oracle, SQL Server, SAP HANA, Postgres, or even connect to data through Python and R. And now, with the March release, we're proud to announce support for Snowflake and Google BigQuery. Additionally, Insights now has a JDBC driver connector. So if there's a JDBC connection out there, you can use it with Insights to connect to those different data sources. Remember back in school when you might have learned about the scientific method? Well, it's kind of the similar thing with Insights, right? Bringing in our data, we're exploring it, discovering things, uncovering things, and finding more questions. And with those questions, we're getting answers. We're running analytical procedures, creating new derivative data sets, and seeing new information. And it can be cyclical, right? It's a never-ending process. You might think about analysis as exploring it, slicing and dicing it, finding questions, and then answering those questions with either spatial analysis or traditional tabular or statistical analysis. Insights does all that, but we don't really break it up or think about it separately. It's all the same tools, all the same functionality, it works the same way. And these capabilities, of course, are all captured, reusable, documented with the model, and scripting can be assisted through this entire process. With exploratory analysis, what do we mean by that? Well, there's lots of mapping options, whether it's proportional symbols or bins or heat maps. Tables, there's two types in Insights. The data table, which is what you use to calculate new fields, and the summary table, which is what you use to, well, summarize. Charts, we're nearing about 20 different chart types within the product. So there's a lot of different options. And of course, date and time. Very important, that temporal aspect. Many different ways, several different ways to deal with that, whether it's a time series, data clock, or heat chart. Maps, tables, charts are all interactive. They don't work by themselves. You select or filter on one, and the results are impacted or seen on the other cards. With Insights, there's several different ways to filter. You can do a spatial filter, predefined filter, which is more of like the checkbox options for viewers. Filter at the card level or the data level. On to spatial analysis. What do we mean by that? Well, you can run a k-means clustering algorithm using spatial or attribute values or field values. Calculate a density ratio, not just a density, but have a a denominator on that value to really normalize it and see it in relationship to something else. Spatial mean, that's where we find the center location of events. Find nearest, what's the nearest facility? What's the nearest location? And being able to aggregate these into any type of boundary. Lots more too. This is just scratching the surface of what's possible. Statistical analysis, sure, let's forecast out and project. Have a calculated moving average that's customizable by the number of days. And even break out the temporal component into seasonal trends and seeing outliers. Graph analysis or link analysis, whether it's mapped or a chart, regression and predict. Again, lots more that you can do with Insights. These are just some examples. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Warren and Chris. Would you mind please showing us analytics within ArcGIS?
All right, let's take a look at using these new tools and features of Insights within an actual workflow. I'm going to start by gathering some data from my local conservation authority. I'm interested in gathering some of the monitoring data recorded at various monitoring stations throughout the watershed. I'm going to be looking at downloading a number of metrics pertaining to monitoring data sets within this watershed. The data I've downloaded is delivered in 1 year increments. To prepare it and pull it into Insights, I'm going to shamelessly plug the Insights scripting environment, where you can extend your Insights environment and prepare your data or conduct analysis. Here's our GitHub repo that has a number of examples to get you started, including the scripts that I even used to prepare this data. If this is your kind of thing, be sure to check out the Insights scripting session where we'll dive in deeper. All right, here we go. Now that we've prepped our data, let's use it to start building some visualizations and conducting some exploratory analysis. The data I've gathered for each monitoring metric is reported from a monitoring station on an hourly basis. Since I'm partial to maps, who knew, right? I was sure to keep the metadata from each station that I gathered and record the latitude and longitude coordinates and assign them to each record. This will be useful to plot our station locations on a map, although you can also geocode your data or assign it a location based on geography. We can now see where our stations are located within the watershed. The data is styled by default using the count of records, but let's switch that to the average of our river flow measurement. Also, I can't resist. I'm going to change the style of the dots to blue because it's water. Much better. Now, we can see right away that the river flow recorded across our watershed varies by location. Since these symbols are classed for the map, let's explore the flow values in a column chart as well. And again, view the flow as an average flow rate. That York station definitely has a significantly higher average flow rate than all the other stations. We'll dig deeper into this a little later, but for now, let's investigate the data from a temporal perspective. So let's use heat chart to break this data into years and months to see how time may play a factor. Now we're getting somewhere. We can already start to see some trends in the data between seasons and years. This aligns with what I would expect in that summers are typically drier, therefore having lower flow rate, and also that higher flow rate occurs in the spring months due to snowmelt. Combining both the spatial and temporal perspectives, let's look at how our data trend plays out between stations both spatially and temporally, and add some more cards to our workbook. Alright, I like maps, but I've also grown fond of the data clocks. I find them especially useful for visual analysis like this, where there's a seasonal cycle to the data. It allows us to compare how that seasonality influences the data between months around the circle and also between years through the concentric rings. I'm going to use these data clocks to look at one specific station. I'll apply a card filter, thereby restricting data flowing into this card to just that which satisfies the station name criteria of Aberfoyle. Because I'm such a fan, I'm going to create a few of these data clocks and filter each to a different station. This gives me a nice overview and allows me to compare how the flow rate varies between stations. Just a quick pro tip, I've also found it's good practice to name your cards as you go. It certainly beats backtracking and trying to figure out what you were doing hours later. Now that we have a sense of the seasonality of our dataset, let's compare it to another that we've collected. I've also gone and obtained the precipitation data reported on the same schedule as our flow data. Let's overlay these two datasets by creating a combo chart. Since these datasets have a common field, and I'll be using year and month, it's as easy as dragging and dropping them onto a chart. I'll do this for both the year and the month so that we can see trends across the entire dataset and within an annual profile. For consistency, let's again explore this data using a heat chart and compare it against our flow rate heat chart. It would appear that the patterns in this data are much less regular than our flow data, and if anything, are almost the inverse, with the most precipitation occurring within the summer months and fall months, whereas the river flow rate at these times is lower. Here's a quick tip. When laying out cards in a workbook, especially when using card filters to limit data to specific monitoring stations or geographies, I always like to include a card that acts as a switchboard, like this heat chart. Thanks to card interactions in Insights, I can explore timeframes within the dataset on this card and have other cards respond, calling out those same timeframes and highlighting them for comparison. Going one step further, tying these flowcharts for year and month together with cross filters allow me to explore a specific year and take a look at what that flow profile looks like within that year. Inversely, we could examine a particular month within a year, for instance April, and look at how average flow rates for April fluctuated year to year across the entire dataset. Let's finally take a look at our data in a time series. This dataset spans almost 14 years and contains hourly flow readings for 15 stations within the watershed. That adds up to a lot of data points. Viewing this data on a time series, we'll see the average flow readings recorded across the watershed. At first, this data is generalized for display purposes. But with some new enhancements in this release,
You'll now reveal more detail as you filter and zoom into data points on the time series. Sticking with the time series theme, there's another new tool for calculating moving average. We can use this tool to average the values of our flow readings within a set window. Let's put this to use and inspect this flow rate spike that occurred in 2015. This spike may have occurred due to issues with the sensors, a blockage, or a significant meteorological event. Regardless, if we would prefer to smooth these fluctuations and calculate the average flow during this period, we can calculate a moving average on the data. I'll use a moving average period of 11 days, 5 on either side of the data point. You can also shift this to be forward-looking or backward-looking to suit your needs. And there, with that, it smooths out that data spike and we get a better sense of the flow trend during this time period. Another new set of tools coming in Insights are the temporal decomposition and forecasting tools. These tools work hand in hand and help you tease out trends within your temporal data and then use that information to generate some future estimates and forecasts. These, like other useful tools, are kicked off from the Action button and live in the How Has It Changed tab. Temporal decomposition teases out the components of your data and reveals the seasonality of the selected phenomena, identifies the trend, and isolates the remainders where the data didn't quite fit. These components then feed the forecasting tool. You can also run this tool separately, but essentially it takes these inputs and forecasts future patterns in your data within the 80 and 95% confidence intervals.
Let's switch gears now and revisit why our observed flow rates varied so much between the monitoring stations. I've started a new tab in my workbook for this and dragged in the datasets I'll be using from the first tab. Starting with a classic column chart, you'll be reminded I was pondering why the York station had such a high flow rate earlier. Even when showing the average, it dwarfs the flow reported by other stations. Let's take a look at how the data is distributed for each station. For that, I'll create a box plot. Well, definitely not what I was hoping for, but it looks like there are definitely some outliers in our data. I don't think any data is ever perfect, and that seems to remain true for our river flow here. It was noted in the data source that inlets at the monitoring stations could become filled with sediment or other debris, which would impact data quality. With this in mind, I'll do my best to filter some of these outliers out of the data before proceeding. To perform this filter, I'll open up the advanced filter on the data and make use of one of the handy formulas contained within. In this case, I'll make use of the standard deviation and omit values that are greater than 3 standard deviations and also those that are less than 0, because I don't think a river can flow backwards. While this isn't perfect, I'm comfortable enough to proceed at the moment with the rest of my analysis. Relating our stations to the actual stream or river from which they gather their observations may reveal a relationship that we can explore. I'll start by adding the stations to a new map and again styling the locations by the average flow rate. This time, I'll add a legend for constant reference. Additionally, adding the watercourses to the map provides extra context. But while we work on it, let's expand this card and give it some extra real estate while we explore. I'll map these rivers and streams using the Strahler attribute, which denotes the hierarchy of each watercourse segment within the watershed, small streams being lower order watercourses and large rivers being much higher. Relating these two features may begin to hint at why some stations have higher values than others. For instance, zooming in to inspect the York station, we can see that this station is near the output of the watershed and is situated on a rather large trunk river. Perhaps that explains why its flow rate is so much higher than others. Using the Find Nearest tool, we can relate the monitoring stations to the nearest river where they are located. By relating these features, our monitoring stations inherit the attributes of the nearest watercourse. By obtaining these new attributes, we can use those to investigate how the stream order may drive river flow. Here, I'll create a scatter plot using the flow recorded at the station and the Strahler attribute gained from the nearest watercourse.
Our scatter plot confirms what we would expect to see, in that the higher order watercourses have greater flow rates. If we define this relationship, we could use this information to estimate and predict flow rates in other portions of the watershed where we don't currently have monitoring stations. Kicking things off again from the Action button, I'll navigate to how it's related and open the regression model tool. Here we can set which variable is our dependent and which are the explanatory, and build a model. The output model will be stored in our data pane, where we can expect the parameters, equation, and fitness of the model. Now that we've developed our regression model, using our observed data, we can use it to predict values for watercourses within the watershed that don't currently have monitoring stations. Returning to the Action button, we can navigate to the Predict Variable tool and apply our model to the watercourses, supplying the Strahler attribute as the input. The output of this tool will provide an estimated flow rate attached to our watercourse dataset based on its Strahler attribute. Let's pause here and take a look at what we've accomplished so far. We've begun digging into our datasets, investigating trends within them, and even exploring relationships between them, both spatially and temporally. All of our work is documented within the analysis view, which makes it clear to others with whom we might share our workbook and collaborate with the actions that we've performed and how we've conducted our analysis. From here, the next step is to present and to communicate our results to our audience.
All right, thanks guys, appreciate that. We're going to move on now to our next section, which is all about sharing and reporting. Now, as an analyst, you want to get the information and knowledge off of your desk into the hands of viewers. And it's important to recognize these two personas, or types of users, if you will. The analyst can do everything, but the viewer, as you'll see in this table, is limited to selecting and filtering and exporting. They're just not able to create new content. So the analyst is the one who creates new analysis, new stories, and the viewer still has all that interactivity. They just aren't creating new content. As an analyst, it's up to you to create compelling reports that capture your viewer's interest and make it understandable. Many ways you can do this as well. Here's a couple tips and tricks. Titles. Give your workbook, your cards, your pages, even your axes, all meaningful titles. Toolbar control. So you can either completely hide the toolbar, as you see in the bottom row of widgets, or in the top row you see how there's colors there. You have control to color them. Ordering, just like you can in PowerPoint. Bring it to the back or front so you can layer these different cards and widgets on top of each other. The borders. You want to control the width, the line type? Absolutely, yes. card colors, all possible, and the page background color as well. You'll notice that all these things can be used to add maybe branding of your organization. Another thing worth mentioning here is predefined filter. Predefined filter is designed to allow your viewers to really interact with the data. There's several options: drop down, single select, multi-select. Again, this text and media widget, this is pretty powerful. Check it out. This is where you add text and tell a narrative around what your report is. Hyperlinks, images, video, all this media, this content. Font is completely controllable as well, whether it's titles or axes. And much of this that we just talked about is stored and reusable in an Insights theme. Now, an Insights theme is an item that can be imported and exported to apply consistent standards across your reports, and it stores a lot of these settings. When you share, you have the option to embed or use the page directly in the Insights viewer, and there's embedding options for you to take custom iframe size. Exporting data is now not only available to analysts, but viewers as well. So remember, when you run operations and insights, often it creates a new data set. You can export that, reuse it somewhere else, and that's completely doable as a viewer too. Oh, and by the way, this viewer export capability is controlled by you as the analyst. So if you don't want anybody exporting as a viewer, you can do that. These models, repeatable, documentable, shareable, rerun it once a year, share it with others so that they can run it in a different region. And workbook packages. This is a newer capability where you can package up your workbook and it either contains the data or references that data and can be imported and exported across the different deployment options: Insights Desktop, Insights in Enterprise, and Insights in ArcGIS Online. With that, I'm going to ask, hey, would it be okay for you to show us this? Warren and Chris, interactive reporting.
Thank you, Scott. So here I have the workbook as Warren left it earlier. To make it a more successful report, we're going to transform it slightly so that it conveys a story or a message, or at very least showcases the data in a more legible format. So let's take a brief look at style and visualization. If we start with the map card, the default light grey base map is good at keeping your data the focus of the card. But if we change the base map to another, such as oceans, which shows the main watercourses, then we give our river locations more context. You'll also notice that the column chart has long labels. 15 stations is also quite a lot of categories, and half of the columns on the column chart are barely large enough to be legible. Now, river flow isn't the sort of data set where we can combine the smaller values into an others column. So instead, we will convert the column chart to a bar chart, and reorder by size. Warren showed how we can use card filters to compare the river flow by station using the data clocks. An alternative approach would be to have one data clock that is controlled either by an on-page filter or by interaction with the other cards on the page. So let's go ahead and delete all bar one of the data clocks. Rename it to average flow by month and year. and remove the card filter. If we now select the card and turn on cross filtering, we can see that the cross filter is turned on by this icon at the top of the card. Now look what happens when I select any of the stations either from the map or the bar chart. The data clock updates accordingly. I could have done something similar by adding a predefined filter with a list of stations from the widget menu. The final tweak we'll make to the style and visualization of these cards is the color. Because all these charts represent either river flow or precipitation, then it makes sense to either use one consistent color or one color for flow and another for precipitation, and to retain this across all chart types. In this specific case, as they both relate to water, I'll make river flow blue and precipitation turquoise. On the combo chart, you might want to make lines slightly darker than fills, but in this session, I'll keep it at that. You can continue to recolor the other charts on the page to match, but we'll see the rest later on. As Scott alludes to in the slides, a little thought to the style of our pages and the story or message we want to convey will also help make the workbook more readable and understandable as a report. So here I have the same page, but I've simply improved the layout, sizing of cards, and spacing between them. I've added some titles using the text and media widget. And I can also use the widget to add some annotations about our findings. To take this further, I loaded in some more of the data that Warren was using that relates to water quality. If we use the workbook to guide the user through the charts, then the data and our findings make a lot more sense once shared with someone else. So, in this example, I focused on the water quality at a particular station or site called Blair. I've added an overview map to let the reader know where Blair is. If this were to be used within a business environment, then our reader is likely to be familiar with the subject matter. So I've also added the water network and sub-basin areas for geographic context. I spent some time styling the map to add a professional finish. Let me go ahead and make one more change to improve the default view or extent. By clicking Set Default Extent, the view currently seen on the map becomes the default pan and zoom that others will see when the page is loaded, or when they click on the Home button on the map card. I can also remove elements I don't want, such as the legend items and even the title bar. Similarly, the slider at the top of our time series graphs is great for allowing the viewer to zoom in to more detail and pan across the time range. But in a more static report like this one, we have the option to remove those also. You can see I've thought about the layout of the page, and as this is more of a story page than a dashboard, I have also ensured that there is adequate space between cards so that we don't overwhelm the viewer. In addition, I've annotated some of our key findings from the analysis on the page using the text and media widget once more. While we usually want the viewer to interact with the charts, it can also help to provide some guidance and summary remarks. For example, when we put a scatter plot matrix next to the dissolved oxygen chart, we can see that the spikes in dissolved oxygen seem to have a far stronger correlation with the pH level of the water than the oxygen level does at other times of the year. Notice also that on the scatter plots, as we have a lot of overlapping data, if we choose not to filter the data in any way, then we can improve these plots visually by adding a suitable amount of transparency. So, once you're happy with your workbook, you can share both it and its contents in a variety of different ways. Firstly, within the workbook, you have the option to share an individual page from the page tabs at the bottom. We can also control here whether or not to allow data from the cards on our page to be exported. Not only can we share the page, but we can also share the theme, which is the page style, and the model, which is the sequence from the original data tables through to the cards we have on the page. This is what you saw in the analysis view that Warren showed earlier. So if we share the model or the theme, we or others can use the same approach again in another workbook. But in this case, let's go ahead and share the page. Notice first of all, we can set with whom we'd like to share the page. So with my organization or as a publicly accessible link. We can share the page as a HTML link that others can see within an Insights view mode. You can see here that whilst the viewer has no access to the data pane or the original data tables, they can still interact with all the cards on the page. The other options that we see are a link to the page item, which is an about page with a description of the page being shared. Another option we have at the bottom here is to schedule an update. What an update does is it allows us to regularly schedule a republishing of the shared page. Finally, the one that we're going to use in this example is the embed code. We have the option of a custom iframe or the iframe code for ArcGIS story maps. A new addition for this release is the ability to choose a custom size of the iframe that is shared. For now, we will stick with the default, so let's copy the embed code for story maps. If we open an ArcGIS story map, wherever you can create a new section, which will depend on your page layout, you can embed your insights. In this example, it is the button labeled Tell Your Story. If we choose to add embed, we can paste the iframe code from earlier and hit save. Within Story Maps, Insights retains all of its interactivity. We can size it as we wish, and the user can pop that out to a full view of the Insights page as we saw earlier. If we come back into Insights, we mentioned earlier allowing viewers to share data. This refers to data from the charts on our cards. So both editors and viewers with permission can flip to the back of a card, choose the Export Data tab, from where we get to preview of the first 10 rows of data. As you can see, this data can now be exported to a CSV file. We can also export data tables in editor mode from the data pane here on the left. These can be exported either as CSV files, shapefiles, or GeoJSON. We also have the ability to share data as a hosted feature layer, or to copy the data table to this Insights workbook. Finally, if we return to the Insights homepage, we can export workbooks to a file. These can be shared with colleagues, and subject to data permissions, can be imported into either the same environment or even a different one. You can even share, for example, a workbook built online, perhaps when working at home, to an enterprise version of Insights, perhaps once you're back in the office. In addition to the export option, we can also share to other users within our environment, exactly the same as we saw earlier with sharing pages. Okay, this completes the demo for this session. Thank you, Warren. It's been a pleasure to meet all of you, albeit virtually. And now I'll pass you back to Scott.
Beautiful. Hey, thank you guys. Sounds great. Good job. Okay, we're going to start to wrap it up here a little bit. We're going to talk about the roadmap and some new things. We had 3 releases in 2020 and 1 coming up here in March. We did a lot in 2020 with those 3 releases, including the final release of Insights Desktop. We had new data connectors like SharePoint and OneDrive, SQL Server OS authentication, new visualization types like charts, bar, and pie charts in the map, support for things like top end and bottom end filters to see the highest and lowest values, new analysis methods, k-means, spatial mean, things like that, and reporting. Just really working towards providing a clean and being able to make meaningful reports. In March, our release coming up, we do have some new big features. Snowflake and Google BigQuery, JDBC connectors, analysis in Viz, being able to manually reorder categories and columns, and adding, for example, monetary labels to those cards and charts. We did a lot of work around time series data for forecasting, moving average, and temporal decomposition. And again, as a viewer, you'll now be able to export data too. Our improvements not only are in the product, but also in some of the documentation. Check out our new VPAT template for accessibility. We did a lot of work around accessibility. We have a new Learn path recently and several new Learn lessons. We have 2 galleries, one for case studies and one for live examples. Encourage you to check all of that out. We also have 2 other technical sessions during the Dev Summit this year. To get a deep dive on Python, check this event out on Thursday. And if you want to know more details about making those JDBC connections, we have a dedicated session just for that, because that's a new feature and it's going to be really powerful. And I'd encourage you to check out our holistic and participate and join us in the holistic testing event when we're going to be working with the new release later in April. And with that, we thank you for your time, and let's have a good discussion and conversation. Hey everybody, thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed that session. We sure enjoyed putting it together. I'm here with Warren and Chris, and we're on the Insights team. Thanks for all your questions. A lot of good stuff coming through. You know, when we were watching that session, I just realized when we recorded it, we planned on doing our release back in March. Just want to give you an update on this release that we were talking about. Our 2021.1 release is going to be going out tomorrow, actually. And that's for the desktop version, Insights Desktop, and Insights in ArcGIS Enterprise. Insights in ArcGIS Online is going to be going out next week. I think it's Wednesday. So just apologies for that date that was within the session today. So we saw a couple questions coming in around, you know, this is the developer summit, obviously, development integration, you know, things like JavaScript and .NET and the APIs. And how can we actually customize Insights and work with it from a developer standpoint and perspective? You know, I was wondering, Warren and Chris, if you could maybe say a few words on that.
Sure. Thanks, Scott. Yeah, so there's a lot of questions about the JavaScript and extending or customizing Insights. Right now, that's not something that's possible. What we tend to do is embed Insights within other apps. You'll have access to like the iframe and putting it into, as Chris demoed, into story maps or into web experience builder. So those are there, but there are other ways that you can leverage some customization. There's a lot of the Python and R scripting within the scripting console within Insights. And just to point out, there is a lot of interactivity and dynamic customization that you can do with Insights out of the box. So I'd encourage you to check those out. But if you have other thoughts or workflows that you'd like have questions about, feel free to find us in the Ask Our Expert section, and we'll talk more.
Yeah, that's a good point, Warren. You know, we really want to learn from you. What are those developer integration points that you're looking for? And because we do want to support your needs. As Warren said today, the capabilities are through the scripting console, and we have a dedicated session on that tomorrow. Something else that we heard about in the question chat was the difference between Insights in Online, Insights Desktop, and Insights Enterprise. And specifically, getting back to the database connection capability and scripting capability. I was wondering if one of you wouldn't mind just touching on that.
Chris, do you want to take that one?
Sure, I can take that. Thank you. So we obviously offer those 3 different levels of insights. I don't know if you can see me and hear me.
Yes.
So we have in Enterprise, we support some of the more, some of the better known databases out of the box. So we support SAP HANA, we support Oracle, we support SQL Server, we support PostGIS or Postgres, but we also support all of the open connectors as well. And you can connect to those also from the desktop app. The difference in online is a lot of the workflow is around what you actually store in ArcGIS Online. So a lot of our online users are reading in things from feature layers and such like instead. In terms of the Python and R functionality, that's something that we do not have within online, but what online users can do is they can use the desktop application to do that work. You can always share between the environments, so you can share your workbooks. And within the Python and Arc console, that's pretty much an open, it's a Jupyter notebooks based widget that allows you to script and create anything that you wish to inside of Insights.
Great. Thanks, Chris. So
Welcome.
if you have Insights in ArcGIS Online, that online web client does not enable scripting nor database connections. But like you said, Chris, if you have Insights in Online, you have access to Insights Desktop. A question came in about where can you download it. It's just on our webpage. Go to any browser search, Insights Desktop download, and then you download the desktop client, Windows or Mac, and you just log in with your licensed user, and you can choose to use both, the web browser client or the desktop client. We had another handful of questions about where does Insights fit in comparison to ArcGIS for Power BI and ArcGIS dashboards. And it might be worth our time to just spend a moment on that. Do either of you want to take that, or shall I?
I can take the broader question because there's also been people talking about dashboards as well. So I'll address the dashboard piece. Basically, ArcGIS dashboards is great for basically reading in data and kind of displaying metrics about it. Insights takes it a step further, and you can do analysis on that data that you're reading in. You can create and join data sets to conduct your analysis. Maybe you want to aggregate things to a different geography, report some larger metrics on, say, asset performance or something, and you want to roll up all the performance metrics of each asset and report that as one metric. Or if you want to integrate scripting and such, that's something that dashboards doesn't do, and that Insights does really well with the analysis framework. So that's where I would encourage Insights over dashboards. I don't know, Chris, if you want to speak to the BI.
Yep, sure. Happy to do that. So the Power BI is understandably a popular sort of software application for users who license a lot of Microsoft products, and Insights more so if you license a lot of Esri products. And we understand and respect that. They are, however, slightly different. And so Power BI supports kind of analytics of typical, if you like, Microsoft data sets. So more your traditional business type of data. And a lot of the chart tools are provided by third parties, whereas Insights is far more geared towards spatial data sets. And there's a lot more you can do in Insights with maps as well as statistical analysis. And ArcGIS Maps for Power BI, that's intended to bridge some of that gap. But it doesn't have the same advanced level of spatial tools and spatial capabilities that you will find inside of Insights.
Beautiful, beautiful. So if I could just maybe quickly try to summarize, Warren, I heard you say that ArcGIS dashboards is great at consuming real-time GIS data, and Insights is a little bit different, and then it concentrates on connecting to both GIS data and business data, non-GIS data, so you can access all those tabular data sets, and adds that analytical component where you can run operations and create new data sets. Chris, I think I heard you say that ArcGIS for Power BI is great for existing Power BI users, but with the inherent nature that we're in the Power BI box, there are some limitations, and Insights is built from the ground up, considering that spatial component. So it's really, an integrated part of the full experience, more spatial to begin with from the get-go.
Absolutely. If I could add just a little to the ArcGIS dashboards versus ArcGIS Insights, just to point out that there's nothing to stop you. A lot of users do actually have a workflow that uses them both.
Thank you for saying that.
So with that, there's just the kind of differentiator that the dashboards is intended as a live view of a particular subject, so kind of a status or indicator of where things are at, whereas Insights, as I said about the Power BI example, so Insights is aimed at the location, and the visual analytics, the more in-depth statistical analytics, and that's usually with historic, but we also now support things like forecasting.
Yeah, great point. It's not an or question. They're complementary. Sometimes there's validity to use both, and they work together. A couple questions also about sharing and the different roles, whether, an analyst, what can an analyst do as opposed to a viewer, and what do I need? Do my viewers have to have an Insights license? Does anybody want to, either Warren or Chris, you want to talk through that a little bit? Or shall I take that? Okay, so yeah, as an analyst, I have full control over creating my reports. I can run my analysis. I can author, I tell my story, a little bit of that story map-ish type of context. We heard about that text and media widget where you can either put in, text and basically tell a narrative, add branding, and it's up to you to really design and tell your analysis story. You share it, either a workbook or a page, and during that sharing process, you are presented with options, just like the rest of the platform. Do you want to share it publicly or anonymously? Do you want to require, share it with a group so that there's a password protection within it? You have to have that named user identity to share it or to access that shared report. It's no different. And depending on how you as the analyst choose to share it publicly, your viewers don't need a license at all. This, of course, assumes that it's the online version. Or if you want to share it to specific groups, they would need to be a viewer or higher within online or enterprise. Let's see, what else do we have, guys?
I'll just plug, there's been some questions about Jupyter notebooks and Python. We actually have a session tomorrow on dedicated to the scripting console and using Jupyter notebooks and R within Insights. So I'd invite those people that are interested to definitely attend that session and check that out.
And remember, we do have the Ask an Expert showcase throughout the entire conference. And we have Insights development team staff standing by. They're waiting for detailed questions. I know we tried to answer the majority of them more broadly, but we would really love to take it to the next level. Let's take the conversation. We in the showcase, we can have the option to do one-on-one chats and even have Teams breakout sessions if needed. So would really encourage you. We want, and there we can hear from you more. What do you need in the product? That's one thing that we as a team really strive to do is keep our ears open and build what you need. So with that, I see we're about 1 minute to go, and I think it's about time to wrap up. Sorry we didn't get to every single question, but please we'll see at the showcase if possible. And remember, we have 2 other sessions this week. One is tomorrow with Python and R scripting, and then we also have another dedicated session that's specifically on making database connections. and including we have support for Snowflake and Google BigQuery coming up after the release this week. So really excited about that. Thank you everyone so much for your time, and on behalf of the Insights team, have a great day.